My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 35 years old, and 3 months ago I sent one photograph to my family's group chat. It showed my 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, lying in a pediatric intensive care unit with tubes in her chest and a fresh bandage running straight down the center of her tiny body. She had survived open heart surgery less than an hour earlier. Under the picture, I wrote only 6 words. She's awake. She wants grandma. My older sister replied first. We're busy. Stop guilt-tripping everyone. 30 seconds later, my mother answered. She survived. Stop making her our problem. There were 16 people in that family group. Every single one of them read those messages. Not one person defended my daughter. Not one person said my mother had gone too far. Not one person asked how Sophie was feeling. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred together. Then I typed the words I had been trained to type my entire life. It's okay. I placed my phone face down on the hospital blanket beside Sophie, walked into the empty hallway outside the ICU, leaned against the cold cinder block wall, and cried where my little girl couldn't hear me. 3 months later, at exactly 9:58 p.m. on a Thursday night, my mother dropped her phone onto the floor of her church fellowship hall. Across town, my sister did exactly the same thing inside an upscale charity banquet. Both women were watching the same television screen. Both women were hearing the same recording. And both women realized, at exactly the same second, that every lie they had built around my daughter's broken heart had just collapsed in front of the entire city. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand why a simple photograph became the most expensive picture my family had ever ignored. I work as a billing coordinator for a regional medical clinic in Louisville, Kentucky. It's not glamorous. I spend my days making sure insurance companies actually pay what they promised patients. When you work around medical bills long enough, you develop 2 habits. You learn that paperwork matters. And you learn that people become their truest selves when sickness enters the room. My husband died 4 years ago. A drunk driver crossed the median on Interstate 64 one rainy November evening. There wasn't much left to argue about after that. Since then, it's been just me and Sophie. She inherited my laugh. She inherited her father's stubbornness. Unfortunately, she also inherited a congenital heart defect that had been quietly monitored since she was born. She called the scar from her first surgery her princess zipper. Children have a remarkable talent for making terrifying things sound adorable. Every year we visited the pediatric cardiologist. Every year we celebrated another healthy report. Every year I believed maybe we'd gotten lucky. Then, during a routine appointment in early March, the ultrasound technician stopped talking. If you've ever spent enough time in hospitals, you know silence has different meanings. Normal silence feels busy. Dangerous silence feels heavy. This silence felt like someone had quietly shut every window in the building. Dr. Patel came into the examination room carrying a folder instead of smiling. She closed the door before sitting down. Doctors only close doors when they need privacy. The repaired valve has deteriorated faster than we expected, she said gently. She explained blood flow, pressure, enlargement, future risks. I honestly remember almost none of it. Only one sentence stayed with me. She needs open heart surgery before summer. Everything after that became lists. Insurance, time off work, hospital reservations, medication schedules, childcare, gas money, hotel rooms. I survived stress by organizing it. So that's exactly what I did. The last thing on my list was family. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the 3rd ring. When I told her Sophie's heart needed another operation, there was a long silence. I thought she was crying. Instead, she asked, "Who else knows?" Not, "Is Sophie scared?" Not, "What did the doctors say?" Not, "What can I do?" Just, "Who else knows?" At the time, I didn't understand why that was the first thing she cared about. I understood 3 days later. Without asking me. Without asking Sophie. Without telling anyone in our little household. My mother and my older sister, Vanessa, launched an online fundraiser called Save Sophie's Heart. I found out because one of my coworkers hugged me in the hallway. I donated yesterday, she whispered. I hope it helps. I smiled politely. Then I asked, donated to what? She looked confused. The fundraiser your family started. She pulled out her phone. There was Sophie's school picture. The one with missing front teeth and pink ribbons. Across the top was a headline in bold red letters. Help US save our little Sophie. Below it, a heartbreaking story. Except most of it wasn't true. It claimed our insurance had denied treatment. False. It claimed I couldn't afford surgery. False. It claimed Sophie might not survive without community support. Also false. Insurance covered nearly 80%. By the second week of March, Save Sophie's Heart had become the biggest feel-good story in our county. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. Not because they knew me. Because they knew Sophie. Or rather, they knew the version of Sophie my mother had carefully created. At the grocery store, strangers stopped us to say they were praying. Cashiers quietly slipped coloring books into our bags. An elderly man pressed a folded $100 bill into Sophie's hand outside a pharmacy. She smiled politely and handed it to me. Mom, she whispered after he walked away, why are people acting like I'm famous? I crouched beside her shopping cart. They're just being kind. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. Children don't question kindness. Adults should. A week later, our local television station asked to interview the family behind the fundraiser. Not me. The family. The producer called Vanessa. Vanessa called my mother. My mother called me. You'll need to wear something nice, she instructed. What time? Saturday morning. I thought this was about Sophie. It is. So why aren't they talking to her mother? Silence. Then my mother sighed the way she always did whenever I asked inconvenient questions. Claire, television isn't your strength. I almost laughed. Television? As though surviving my daughter's heart condition required media training. The interview took place inside the children's wing of the hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me. They filmed us in a waiting room Sophie had never actually used. The cameraman adjusted lights while Vanessa practiced smiling. My mother fixed the collar of her navy blazer 3 separate times. The reporter, Emily Dawson, introduced herself warmly. She seemed genuinely compassionate. I just want people to understand what your family is going through. Before I could answer, Vanessa stepped forward. We've been devastated. She placed one perfectly manicured hand over her heart. Sophie means everything to us. Everything. The word echoed in my head. Emily asked who had organized the fundraiser. Vanessa smiled modestly. Oh, I just couldn't stand by and do nothing. My mother reached over and squeezed her hand proudly. Our family always comes together during hard times. I stood 3 feet away. No one asked me a single question for almost 15 minutes. Eventually, Emily turned toward me. Claire, what would you like people watching at home to know? Finally, I looked straight into the camera. I just hope my daughter gets through surgery safely. Simple. Honest. Real. Before I could continue, Vanessa interrupted. And thanks to this amazing community, we don't have to worry about the financial burden. Emily nodded sympathetically. The interview ended 5 minutes later. When it aired that evening, almost everything I said had been edited out. Instead, viewers watched Vanessa fighting back carefully rehearsed tears while my mother praised the incredible generosity of our town. A graphic appeared on screen. Current donations, $83,417. The total climbed another $12,000 before bedtime. The hospital called 3 days later. Sophie's surgery date had been finalized. April 18th. 5 weeks away. Suddenly everything became real. Preoperative blood work. New medications. Consent forms. School paperwork. Time off from work. Every night after Sophie fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and calculator. Not because I love numbers. Because numbers couldn't lie to me. People could. One Thursday afternoon, the hospital billing department emailed our estimated expenses. Insurance covered most of it. Our responsibility, just under $11,000. It wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy either. I forwarded the invoice to Vanessa, along with a short message. Since the fundraiser has done so well, could you send the hospital deposit directly? They've included payment instructions below. She didn't answer. Instead, she called. I saw your email. Great. You sound awfully demanding. I blinked. Demanding? The fundraiser isn't your personal checking account. I looked at the phone in disbelief. My daughter is literally the reason people donated. You should appreciate everything we're doing. I do. Then trust us. When will the hospital receive the payment? We're working on a plan. What plan? Silence. Then, the money needs to be managed responsibly. It belongs to Sophie. It belongs to the foundation. I frowned. What foundation? You'll see. Then she hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about that conversation bothered me. Not just the words. The confidence behind them. Like decisions had already been made without me. The next morning I opened a 3-inch gray binder. Inside, I placed the fundraiser screenshots, donation totals, emails, invoices, bank confirmations, every public Facebook post, every interview, every receipt. I worked in medical billing. Documentation wasn't paranoia. Documentation was survival. I labeled the first divider, fundraiser. I had no idea that before summer arrived, that binder would become nearly 400 pages thick. 2 weeks before surgery, Sophie came into the kitchen carrying a folded piece of construction paper. I made Grandma something. She unfolded it carefully. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. One was labeled Mom. One was labeled me. The tallest one had gray hair. Grandma. Above them she'd written in giant crooked letters, "My heart is better when my family is here." I felt something tighten in my throat. It's beautiful. Will Grandma hang it on her refrigerator? I'm sure she will. Can we give it to her before surgery? Of course. That Saturday we drove to my mother's house. She greeted us with a distracted smile. Boxes filled her dining room. Stacks of decorations covered every surface. Purple ribbons. Printed banners. Centerpieces. What are all these? I asked. Oh. She smiled proudly. We're planning the Save Sophie's Heart Charity Gala. I stared. The what? A fundraising banquet. I looked around the room. Crystal candle holders. Professional invitations. Rental contracts. Floral catalogs. It looked like someone was planning a wedding. Surgery is in 12 days. I know. So why are you planning a party? It'll raise even more money. I glanced toward Sophie. She was patiently waiting beside Grandma with her drawing. My mother barely looked at it. Oh, sweetheart, that's lovely. She set it on a pile of unopened mail without reading it. Then immediately turned back toward Vanessa. Should we order white roses or orchids for the stage? Sophie quietly walked back toward me. She slipped her tiny hand into mine. Mom? Yeah. I don't think Grandma saw my picture. I squeezed her hand gently. She was just busy. Sophie nodded. Children always believe the adults they love deserve another chance. I did too. For far longer than I should have. 3 nights before we left for the children's hospital. My phone buzzed. A notification from Facebook. Vanessa Morgan created an event. I opened it. My stomach dropped. Saves Sophie's Heart Spring Gala. Saturday, April 18th. I read the date twice. Then a third time. April 18th. The exact day. My 8-year-old daughter would be lying unconscious in an operating room with her chest open. My family had scheduled a black tie fundraising celebration on the day of her open-heart surgery, 90 miles away, without telling me. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst thing they were about to do. The drive to Cincinnati took just under 2 hours. It felt like 2 years. Sophie sat in the back seat hugging Mr. Buttons, the stuffed rabbit she'd owned since she was 3. She spent most of the drive looking out the window. Every few minutes she asked another question. Will it hurt? A little. Will I have another zipper? Yes. Will you stay with me? I won't leave for a second. She smiled. Promise? I promise. She believed me completely. That trust weighed more than anything else I carried into that hospital. Children's hospitals have a strange atmosphere. Half playground, half battlefield. Bright murals covered the walls. Aquariums bubbled in waiting rooms. Volunteers pushed little red wagons full of toys. Everything looked cheerful. Everything smelled like antiseptic. We checked into our room the afternoon before surgery. A nurse named Karen introduced herself with the kind of smile only pediatric nurses seem able to give. You must be Sophie. I'm getting my heart fixed. Karen grinned. I heard you're the bravest girl in Kentucky. Sophie looked at me proudly. Mom says being brave means you're scared, but you do it anyway. Karen glanced at me. You've taught her well. I wished I believed that. That evening, Dr. Reynolds, the pediatric cardiac surgeon, came in with scans tucked under his arm. He explained the procedure carefully. The damaged valve would be replaced. The operation would likely take 7 to 9 hours. There were risks. There were always risks. But he believed Sophie had an excellent chance of making a full recovery. When he finished, Sophie looked up at him. Will my rabbit be lonely while I'm asleep? Dr. Reynolds smiled. I'll make sure someone watches him. She seemed satisfied. Adults worry about survival. Children worry about stuffed animals. At 6:30 the next morning, they wheeled Sophie toward the operating room. She reached one small hand toward me. I held it until I couldn't anymore. Just before the doors closed, she smiled through her fear. Love you, Mommy. I love you more. Then she disappeared. Waiting rooms distort time. Minutes become hours. Hours become lifetimes. I tried reading. Couldn't. Tried coffee. Didn't taste it. Tried praying. Forgot the words halfway through. Around noon Karen appeared carrying a paper cup. You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. I wasn't asking. She sat beside me anyway. My son had leukemia. I looked at her. She smiled softly. He's 23 now. I finally took the coffee. Sometimes hope arrives wearing hospital scrubs. At 1 o'clock, I checked my phone. Still nothing from my family. No texts asking for updates. No calls. No messages for Sophie. The family group chat sat completely silent. Then Facebook notified me that Vanessa had gone live. For one confused second, I thought she decided to ask everyone to pray. Instead, my screen filled with crystal chandeliers, round banquet tables, a ballroom, hundreds of guests dressed in formal clothes. Across the stage hung a massive banner. Saves Sophie's Heart Spring Gala. People applauded while a string quartet played softly in the background. My mother stood near the stage wearing a sparkling silver dress. Vanessa walked to the podium in a floor-length emerald gown. I stared at the livestream in disbelief. They weren't preparing for the gala. The gala had already started. While surgeons were opening my daughter's chest, my family was posing for photographs. The camera panned across the ballroom. Corporate sponsors, local politicians, church leaders, television personalities. A silent auction. Wine glasses. Professional photographers. It looked less like a fundraiser and more like an award ceremony. Then Vanessa stepped behind the microphone. I just want to thank everyone for supporting our precious Sophie. Applause. Family means everything. More applause. We know she's fighting today. People stood. Actually stood. They gave a standing ovation. My mother wiped away perfectly timed tears. Someone released white balloons across the ceiling. I sat alone in a plastic hospital chair, watching strangers celebrate my daughter, without the one person who actually needed them. At 4:13 that afternoon, the operating room doors finally opened. Dr. Reynolds walked toward me. Every parent knows there's 1 second when you read the surgeon's face before hearing a single word. His expression softened. The surgery went very well. My knees nearly gave out. The valve is functioning beautifully. I covered my mouth. Can I see her? As soon as she settled in intensive care, I thanked him so many times the words lost meaning. Nothing else mattered. Not the gala. Not the fundraiser. Not my family. My daughter was alive. The ICU was dimly lit. Machines beeped steadily. Sophie's skin looked almost transparent beneath the blankets. She had tubes, monitors, bandages, enough wires to frighten any parent. Around 8 that evening, her eyelids fluttered. She slowly focused on me. Her voice barely existed. Mom, I'm here. She smiled weakly. I did it. You absolutely did. Then, she asked the question I'd been dreading all day. Did Grandma come? I froze. How do you explain abandonment to an 8-year-old? I brushed her hair away from her forehead. Grandma knows you did great. She nodded sleepily. Can you send her a picture? Of course. And tell her. I still have my zipper. I laughed through tears. I will. I took exactly one photograph. Not for social media. Not for sympathy. Not for donations. Just for family. Sophie's tiny thumb was raised halfway. Her smile was exhausted. Her eyes were still heavy from anesthesia. But she was alive. I opened our family group chat. 16 relatives. Every aunt. Every uncle. Every cousin. My mother. Vanessa. I uploaded the picture. Then I typed. She's awake. Surgery was successful. She wants Grandma. I hit send. Less than 30 seconds later, Vanessa replied, We're in the middle of the gala. Handle it yourself. I stared at the screen. Before I could process it, another message appeared. From my mother. She survived. Stop making her our problem. The ICU suddenly felt very, very quiet. 16 people saw those words. Every single one of them. No one objected. No one defended Sophie. No one told my mother she should be ashamed. I read the messages again. And again. And again. Finally, with shaking hands, I typed the sentence I'd spent 35 years using to keep everyone else comfortable. It's okay. Then I placed my phone face down beside my daughter's hospital bed, walked into the empty stairwell, covered my mouth with both hands, and cried harder than I had the day my husband died. Because for the first time in my life, I finally understood something. My mother hadn't chosen the gala over me. She had chosen applause over her own granddaughter's heartbeat. And that realization would become the first page of the evidence that eventually destroyed everything they had built. We came home 5 days later. Sophie moved carefully, clutching a heart-shaped pillow the hospital had given her to protect her chest whenever she coughed. The scar down the center of her chest was still covered with fresh surgical tape. She proudly called it her new zipper. Every morning she asked me to help clean around it. Every night she asked the same question. Has Grandma called yet? Every night my answer became a little quieter. Not yet, sweetheart. She always smiled anyway. Maybe tomorrow. Children have an endless supply of hope. Adults spend years learning how to lose it. By the second week after surgery, the medical bills began arriving. One envelope. Then another. Then another. Insurance had done exactly what it promised. But deductibles don't disappear because strangers feel sorry for you. Hotel costs, gas, parking, prescription copays, physical therapy, special cardiac follow-up appointments. When I entered everything into my spreadsheet, our total out-of-pocket expenses came to just over $12,400. I looked at one number, then another. The online fundraiser still displayed its public total, $148,932 raised. Almost $150,000. Raised with my daughter's face. Raised because people believed they were helping Sophie. Raised because complete strangers cared more about my child than her own grandmother did. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and emailed Vanessa. The email was polite. Painfully polite. Hi Vanessa. Sophie's medical expenses have now been finalized. I've attached copies of every hospital invoice and insurance statement. Since the fundraiser was created for her treatment, could you please transfer enough funds to cover the remaining medical expenses? Thank you, Claire. I attached every bill, every receipt, every invoice. Then I waited. 3 days passed. Nothing. No reply. No phone call. No explanation. On the 4th day, a bank notification appeared on my phone. Deposit received $5,000. I frowned. That couldn't be right. 5,000? Out of nearly 150,000? Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Vanessa. I answered immediately. Did you get it? She asked cheerfully. I did. Great. I waited. She said nothing else. Vanessa. Yeah, that's not even half the hospital bills. We decided that's enough. Our family. I closed my eyes. My daughter's surgery raised almost $150,000. And? Where's the rest? There was a long pause. Then she laughed softly. You really don't understand the bigger picture. What bigger picture? The foundation. Again. That word. Foundation. I gripped the phone tighter. What foundation? You'll hear about it soon. Vanessa. The money isn't just for Sophie anymore. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What does that even mean? It means we're thinking long term. My daughter needed open heart surgery. And hundreds of other children have heart problems too. So we decided to create something permanent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You decided? It benefits everyone. No. I said it quietly. It benefited Sophie. Claire. People donated because they believed they were helping one little girl. They're helping many. They weren't asked. They don't need to be. Then she hung up. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. The foundation. I opened Google. Typed only 2 words. Nothing. Then I searched our state's nonprofit registry. Still nothing. I assumed maybe Vanessa had been bluffing. Until 11 days later. I found it by accident. I had been searching for property tax records at work during lunch. On a whim, I searched the nonprofit database again. This time, a result appeared. The Sophie Morgan Heart Foundation. Registered 9 days earlier. Director, Vanessa Morgan. Treasurer, Margaret Ellis. My mother. My stomach turned. I clicked the registration. Mission statement. Providing hope and financial assistance to children battling congenital heart disease while honoring Sophie's courageous journey. Honoring. Interesting word. Because no one had bothered asking Sophie. Or me. There was already a professional logo. A polished website. A donation button. Board members. Corporate sponsors. Even upcoming fundraising events. The website featured 7 photographs of Sophie. 7. I had authorized exactly 0. I drove home in silence. Halfway there, I stopped at a traffic light. Across the intersection stood a city bus shelter. Something caught my eye. A little girl smiling. Pink sweater. Missing front teeth. Sophie's school picture, printed 6 feet tall across the side of the shelter. Above her face, the foundation logo. Below it, a slogan. One little heart can save thousands more. In the bottom right corner, almost hidden, appeared another logo. Vanessa's real estate company. I stared through the windshield. Cars behind me began honking. The light had turned green. I hadn't noticed. From the back seat, Sophie's voice broke the silence. Mom? Yeah? Why am I on that bus stop? I couldn't answer. She kept looking. Did somebody ask me first? No. Nobody had. Not me. Not her. Nobody. That evening, I opened the gray binder again. Until then, it contained mostly receipts, invoices, screenshots, donation totals. Now, I added a new divider. I wrote 2 words across the tab. The foundation. Then I began printing everything. The nonprofit registration, website screenshots, advertising, public announcements, every Facebook post, every interview, every brochure. If they wanted to build a business around my daughter's heart, I was going to document every brick. The following Sunday, my mother invited everyone to dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, homemade rolls. Exactly like every Sunday of my childhood. Only this time, I wasn't there to eat. After dessert, I quietly placed the binder on the dining room table. My mother looked at it. What is that? My questions. Vanessa smirked. Oh, Claire. I ignored her. I looked directly at my mother. When exactly were you planning to tell me you started a foundation using my daughter's name? The room became very still. Even the grandchildren stopped talking. My mother slowly folded her napkin, then looked me straight in the eyes. There are things bigger than one child. I stared. I'm sorry. She leaned back calmly. Our family has a reputation for helping people. This family? Yes. Sophie nearly died. And now her story can help thousands. My daughter isn't a marketing campaign. No. My mother said softly. She's an opportunity. The entire room went silent. I looked around the table. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle suddenly became fascinated with his coffee. No one defended Sophie. Again. Then my mother spoke the sentence that explained her entire life. The sentence I would later hear replayed on television in front of the whole city. She looked directly at me and said, "A family's name is worth more than one person's feelings." At that moment, for the first time since the surgery, I stopped wondering whether they loved my daughter. Instead, I began wondering how much of the money was already gone. I didn't argue with my mother. Not that night. There was no point. People assume arguments change minds. They don't. Arguments only expose them. And my mother had just exposed hers. A family's name is worth more than one person's feelings. She had said it calmly, without anger, without hesitation, as though it were a law of nature, like gravity, or winter, or death. I quietly closed my gray binder. I'm leaving. My mother nodded once. That's probably best. Not one person stood up. Not one cousin followed me outside. Not one uncle said my daughter deserved better. 16 adults sat around that dining table. Every one of them chose comfort over courage. Again, the drive home was silent. Sophie watched cartoons in the back seat with headphones on. She had no idea her grandmother had just reduced her life to a public relations opportunity. Halfway home, she tapped my shoulder. Mom? Yeah, sweetheart. Did Grandma like the cookies I made? I swallowed. She had baked chocolate chip cookies with me the day before. Specifically for Grandma. She'd even written "Love Sophie" on the container with purple marker. I think she forgot to tell you. Sophie smiled. That's okay. The words landed harder than they should have. Because they sounded exactly like mine. Exactly. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked into the kitchen. Made tea. Opened the gray binder. For nearly an hour, I simply stared at it. Then something shifted inside me. For 35 years, I'd approached every family problem like a daughter, trying not to upset anyone, trying to understand everyone, trying to keep peace. Peace had gotten me exactly nowhere. So I decided to approach this one differently. Like an accountant. Accountants don't care about personalities. They care about paper, numbers, dates, evidence. I made myself a checklist. Fundraiser timeline. Medical bills. Deposits received. Foundation registration. Public statements. Advertising. Everything. If someone ever asked me what happened, I wanted the answer to fit inside a binder instead of an opinion. The next week became an obsession. Every evening after Sophie fell asleep, I worked. I downloaded every fundraiser update, every donation milestone, every newspaper article, every television interview, every social media advertisement. I matched dates, compared totals, tracked public announcements. One thing quickly became obvious. The numbers didn't match. Whenever Vanessa announced another fundraising milestone, the foundation somehow announced a new project only days later. A redesigned website, professional branding, printed banners, promotional merchandise. Someone was spending money. A lot of it. Then another strange thing happened. Our local children's hospital mailed me a satisfaction survey. Near the bottom was a question. Were you satisfied with the charitable assistance provided? I frowned. Charitable assistance? I checked a no and wrote a note. We never received any charitable assistance beyond our insurance coverage. 3 days later, someone from the hospital called. Her name was Melissa. She worked in donor relations. I think there may have been a misunderstanding. What kind? Your family's fundraiser. I sat up straighter. What about it? She hesitated carefully. There was a public announcement that a substantial donation would be made to our pediatric cardiac program. My pulse quickened. What announcement? It was mentioned during the Save Sophie's Heart Gala. I wasn't there. Oh. Silence. Then. I'm sorry. She genuinely sounded embarrassed. I assumed. What donation? She opened something on her computer. It appears a pledge of $50,000 was announced. I almost dropped the phone. 50,000? Yes. We never authorized that. I understand. Did the hospital receive it? There was another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she answered. No. I stared at the kitchen wall. I'm sorry. We've never received those funds. Are you sure? I checked before calling. Maybe they're still processing? The gala was over 6 weeks ago. She spoke gently. We haven't received anything. After hanging up, I didn't move for several minutes. $50,000. Announced publicly. Applauded. Celebrated. Never delivered. I opened YouTube. Typed. Save Sophie's Heart Gala. There it was. Professionally recorded. 47 minutes long. I skipped ahead. 29 minutes. Vanessa stood behind a podium. The audience filled a ballroom. My mother sat at the front table smiling proudly. Vanessa raised a champagne glass. Tonight. Applause. Our family is honored to pledge. She paused dramatically. $50,000. Standing ovation. To Children's Hope Medical Center in Sophie's honor. People clapped. Some cried. The camera cut to my mother. She pressed a tissue against her eyes. Then the audience rose to its feet. I looked around my empty kitchen. Nobody had written that check. Nobody had delivered that money. They had accepted applause. For generosity that never existed. For the first time, I stopped believing this was about vanity. Vanity wants compliments. This was something else. This was fraud wearing a corsage. The next morning, I drove to the hospital. Melissa met me in her office. She printed the pledge records. Nothing. No payment. No installment. No communication afterward. Just silence. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I assumed your family had explained everything. They haven't explained anything. She nodded sadly. I figured. Before leaving, she handed me a business card. If you ever need documentation. She looked directly at me. Call me. I slipped the card into my binder. Another piece of paper. Another witness. On the drive home, I realized something terrifying. If they could publicly pretend to donate $50,000 without actually donating it, what else had they lied about? How much of the $148,000 was still sitting safely somewhere? How much had already disappeared? And if strangers eventually discovered the truth, who would they blame? Vanessa? My mother? Or the little girl whose smiling face appeared on every banner, every billboard, every fundraising poster, without ever knowing that her broken heart had quietly become the most profitable business our family had ever owned? That afternoon, I opened the gray binder once again. I added a fresh divider. This one had only 3 words written across it in thick black marker. Where did it go? I didn't know it yet. But the answer to that question wasn't hiding in a bank. It was sitting inside my own sister's house, waiting for someone brave enough to look. 2 weeks later, my sister called me. That alone was unusual. Vanessa never called unless she wanted something. Hey, Claire. Her voice sounded unusually sweet. What do you need? She laughed. You always assume the worst. Experience. A brief silence followed. Then she got to the point. I'm flying to Arizona for a real estate conference. So, I need someone to feed Bailey. Bailey was her golden retriever. And water my plants. I almost laughed. She hadn't visited my daughter after open heart surgery. She hadn't called. She hadn't apologized. But she wanted me to babysit her dog. No. Oh, come on. No. You'll already be driving near my neighborhood. No. Another pause. Then, I'll pay you. I wasn't interested in her money, but something else crossed my mind. Her house. Her office. Her paperwork. I answered carefully. When are you leaving? 3 days later, I found myself standing in front of Vanessa's house with Sophie's scooter in one hand and Bailey's leash in the other. Sophie loved dogs. That was my excuse. The truth was simpler. Something in my gut kept whispering that answers were hiding somewhere inside this house. I hated that feeling, mostly because it was usually right. Vanessa had left the spare key under a ceramic frog beside the porch. Typical. She believed appearances mattered more than security. The house looked exactly like every photograph she posted online. Spotless. Designer furniture. Fresh flowers. Everything carefully arranged for admiration. Sophie ran straight toward Bailey. The golden retriever immediately rolled onto his back for belly rubs. Within minutes, they were playing happily in the backyard. For the first time in weeks, my daughter laughed without pain. I watched her through the kitchen window for a moment, then quietly walked toward Vanessa's home office. I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't searching drawers. I wasn't planning anything illegal. I simply wanted dog food. She'd texted that it was in the office closet. The closet door opened easily. Dog food sat on the bottom shelf, exactly where she'd said. But something else caught my eye. 4 identical white banker boxes, each neatly labeled. Foundation. Curiosity isn't a crime. I lifted the lid on the first box. Inside were donation envelopes, receipts, thank you cards, sponsor packets. Nothing surprising. The second box contained promotional materials, t-shirts, brochures, fundraising banners. Again, nothing unusual. The third box made my heart beat slow. Instead of paperwork, it contained electronics. 3 brand new laptop computers, still sealed. 6 tablet devices. Boxes of expensive smartphones. Every item carried a small sticker. Foundation property. I frowned. Why would a charity for sick children need thousands of dollars worth of electronics? Maybe volunteers used them. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Then I opened the fourth box. Inside lay dozens of folders, each labeled with a family name. Some contained photographs of children, hospital records, medical summaries, letters, applications. I quickly realized what they were. Families asking the foundation for help. One folder caught my attention. A handwritten sticky note read, "Approved $8,000. I smiled. Finally, proof they'd actually helped someone. Then I noticed something strange. The approval letter was unsigned. No payment receipt. No check copy. Nothing. I opened another folder. Approved. No payment. Another. Approved. No payment. Another. Approved. Nothing. One after another. Every family had been approved. Not one file contained proof that money had ever left the foundation. My stomach tightened. "Mom," Sophie's voice floated in through the open window. I found a butterfly. I quickly closed the folders. Took Bailey's food outside. Spent the next hour pretending everything was normal. But my mind never left those boxes. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about those applications. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe payment records were stored digitally. Maybe accounting worked differently. I wanted to believe that. So the next morning, I called one of the names from memory. A woman named Angela Brooks. Her phone number appeared on the application. I hesitated before dialing, then pressed call. She answered after 3 rings. "Hello. My name is Claire Morgan." Silence. Then, "The Sophie Foundation?" "No. I struggled to explain. "My daughter is Sophie." Another silence. Then Angela gasped. "Oh my God. You know who I am? I've wanted to thank you." "You have. They told us none of this would have existed without your daughter." I closed my eyes. "I'm glad they helped." Her voice changed. "Helped? Yes. They approved your application, right? They approved it. So, they said funding would arrive within 30 days. My heart sank. When was that? Almost 4 months ago. Did it ever come? No. What happened? They stopped answering emails. I slowly sat down. My son still needs surgery. Her voice cracked. We're trying to save enough ourselves. I couldn't speak. She continued quietly. I honestly thought your family just forgot about us. After ending the call, I cried. Not for myself. For Angela. For her son. For every family who had believed help was coming. Just like strangers had believed they were helping Sophie. Hope had been collected, filed, labeled, then ignored. Over the next week, I contacted 5 more families. 3 returned my calls. Every story sounded almost identical. Approved, celebrated, photographed. Then, nothing. One father told me he'd spent nearly $800 traveling to attend a foundation event because he believed they were receiving a grant that weekend. Instead, they were thanked publicly for sharing their inspiring story. No grant ever came. A little girl from Tennessee appeared on the foundation website for 6 months. Her parents never received $1. Another family donated auction items worth thousands because they'd been promised future assistance. It never arrived. Each conversation added another page to my binder. Another witness. Another unanswered promise. Another child used as a photograph instead of a person. By the end of that month, the gray binder no longer closed properly. It had grown so thick that the rings barely latched. Evidence. Receipts. Applications. Screenshots. Statements. Broken promises. But I still had one problem. I knew families weren't receiving money. I knew the hospital hadn't received $50,000. I knew only $5,000 had reached Sophie. What I still didn't know was where the remaining $140,000 had actually gone. That answer arrived completely by accident. When someone from my mother's church congratulated her on driving the brand new $85,000 luxury SUV she'd earned after all her charity work. And suddenly, the missing money didn't feel missing anymore. I first saw the SUV on a Wednesday afternoon. Sophie's follow-up cardiology appointment had gone well. Dr. Reynolds smiled as he listened to her heart and said the words I'd prayed to hear. Everything sounds exactly as it should. For the first time in months, I breathed without feeling like I was borrowing air. As Sophie skipped beside me toward the parking garage, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Collins, my mother's church friend. She'd known me since I was 7. "Claire, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of your mother." I smiled politely. "That's nice. She deserves that beautiful new SUV after everything she's done for sick children." I stopped walking. "What SUV?" "The black Escalade." I frowned. "My mother drives a 10-year-old Honda." Mrs. Collins laughed. "Not anymore." That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past my mother's neighborhood. Sure enough, parked proudly in her driveway, sat a brand new black Cadillac Escalade, still wearing temporary dealership tags. The protective plastic hadn't even been removed from the rear seats. I sat across the street for nearly 5 minutes. My mother retired 3 years earlier. Her pension barely covered her mortgage. There was absolutely no way she could afford an $85,000 luxury SUV. Unless someone else had. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always did. I documented it. Photos, license plate, temporary registration, date, time. Everything went into the gray binder. Then I went home. 2 days later, another coincidence landed in my lap. A former coworker named Jason called me. We'd worked together years ago before he became a loan officer at a local bank. "Claire." "Hey." I wasn't sure whether I should tell you this. My stomach tightened. "Tell me what?" "I processed a commercial loan application yesterday." "So?" "It involved your sister." That got my attention. Jason lowered his voice. "I can't discuss confidential financial details." "I understand. But I recognized your daughter's name." Every muscle in my body went still. "What do you mean?" "There was documentation referencing the Sophie Morgan Hart Foundation." I didn't interrupt. "I shouldn't even be saying this." "You don't have to." He sighed. "I just think you should start asking questions." Before I could respond, he ended the call. That single conversation haunted me. A commercial loan? Using the foundation? Why? The charity had nearly $150,000. Why borrow more money? Unless the money wasn't there anymore. 3 days later, I got another surprise. Vanessa invited me to lunch. Voluntarily. That had never happened before. She chose the most expensive restaurant in town. Valet parking. White tablecloths. Crystal glasses. She arrived 20 minutes late wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a purse I recognized immediately. A Louis Vuitton Neverfull. Real. Not fake. Around $2,300. She noticed me looking. "Cute, isn't it? It suits you." It was a little reward. "For what?" She smiled. "Working hard." The waiter approached. She ordered lobster, champagne, dessert before the meal. I ordered iced tea. Halfway through lunch, she leaned back comfortably. So, I heard you've been asking questions." I stirred my tea. "I ask questions for a living." "You've been calling foundation families." "Interesting." She knew. "I have." "That's inappropriate." "They're public beneficiaries." "They're private." "They gave me permission to speak." Her smile disappeared. "You should stop." "Why?" "Because you're confusing people." "No." I looked directly at her. "I think they're already confused." Silence. Then she leaned forward. Claire. What? You've always been emotional. I've actually been remarkably calm. You don't understand nonprofit accounting. I understand accounting. Not this kind. Then explain it. She laughed. I don't owe you an explanation. My daughter's face built that foundation. Exactly. The word hung between us. Exactly. Not. Your daughter deserves transparency. Not. Let's review the records together. Just. Exactly. When lunch ended, Vanessa stood. Oh. She smiled almost casually. Mom's buying a lake house. I blinked. A what? A vacation place. With what money? She shrugged. She's finally enjoying life. Then she walked away. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. SUV. Designer purse. Lake house. Commercial loans. None of it made sense. Unless the foundation wasn't simply spending money. It was becoming someone's lifestyle. A week later, an anonymous envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, only 3 things. A photocopy of a dealership invoice, a handwritten sticky note, and a USB flash drive. The invoice showed the purchase of my mother's Escalade. Paid in full. No financing. The purchaser wasn't Margaret Ellis. It wasn't Vanessa Morgan. The purchaser was listed as SM Chef Operating Account. The Sophie Morgan Hart Foundation. I stared at the page for a full minute, then looked at the sticky note. 6 handwritten words. Follow the credit card statements. No signature. No explanation. Just those words. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. It contained only scanned PDFs. Foundation credit card statements. Not all of them. Only 4 months' worth. But they were enough. The first charge seemed ordinary. Office supplies. The second, restaurant. $800. The third, luxury spa. $940. Then came designer clothing stores, jewelry boutiques, 5-star hotels, airline tickets, golf resorts, furniture galleries. One charge made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny. Because it was so unbelievably arrogant. A payment of $4,280 to a cosmetic surgery clinic. The transaction description simply read, Professional image consultation. Professional image. Using money strangers believed was saving children. I kept scrolling. Every page got worse. By midnight, my dining room table had disappeared beneath printed statements. I highlighted every suspicious purchase. When I finished, the total exceeded $63,000. And that was only 4 months. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I finally understood why they had been so confident. Why they dismissed my questions. Why they ignored Sophie. They never expected anyone to see the numbers. Because they never expected the one person they underestimated to know exactly how to read them. The next morning, I received an email from someone whose name I had never seen before. The subject line contained only 4 words. I used to work there. And attached to that email was the document that turned my suspicions into undeniable proof. The email arrived at 7:14 the next morning. No greeting. No signature. Just a single sentence. You deserve to know what they're doing. Attached was a PDF titled, Foundation Expense Authorization Log. I stared at the attachment for several seconds before opening it. The first page looked ordinary. Vendor names, dates, approval signatures, payment amounts. Everything appeared professionally organized. Then I noticed something. Every expense required 2 signatures. One belonged to Vanessa. The other, to my mother. Every single purchase had been approved by both of them. No mistakes. No rogue employee. No misunderstanding. It was deliberate. The second page changed everything. There was a reimbursement request for executive travel. Destination: Maui, Hawaii. Conference purpose: Charitable Leadership Summit. Amount: $18,672.43. Attached itinerary: 7 nights. Oceanfront resort. Couples massage. Sunset dinner cruise. Helicopter tour. There wasn't a single charity event listed anywhere. Not one. They had called a vacation. Executive travel. Paid for by donations meant for sick children. Then I reached the final page. There, highlighted in yellow, was a line that made my stomach turn. Marketing asset license renewal. Asset name: Sophie Morgan. Image rights. Amount paid: $15,000. I blinked. Then read it again. Image rights? My daughter was 8 years old. No one had ever signed permission. No one had paid us. Who exactly had received $15,000 for licensing Sophie's image? The authorization listed the vendor: Morgan Creative Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of it. I searched the business registry. Owner: Vanessa Morgan. Registered 3 months earlier. The same week the fundraiser exploded online. I leaned back in my chair. They hadn't just used Sophie's photographs. They had created their own company, then billed the charity for the right to keep using them. They were paying themselves. At the bottom of the email sat one final sentence: "Call me when you're ready." A phone number followed. I stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before dialing. A woman answered. "My name is Rachel." Her voice sounded nervous. "I used to be the foundation's bookkeeper. We met that afternoon in a quiet coffee shop 20 miles outside town." Rachel looked exhausted. She couldn't have been older than 28. She slid into the booth carrying a laptop bag that never left her side. "I've wanted to talk to you for months. Why didn't you?" I was scared. "Of what?" She laughed bitterly. "Your sister." That answer surprised me. Rachel explained she had been hired shortly after the fundraiser began. At first, everything seemed legitimate. The foundation planned to help children. Sponsors poured in. Community support exploded. Then, the invoices started changing. They stopped asking whether expenses were necessary. Rachel stirred her untouched coffee. They only asked whether they could hide them. I stayed silent. They told me every charity spends money. That's true. But they weren't spending. She looked directly at me. They were laundering their lifestyle through the foundation. The words hung between us. Laundering. Lifestyle. Foundation. Together. They formed a sentence I never wanted to hear. Rachel opened her laptop. I copied everything before I resigned. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Thousands of transactions. Donation records. Expense reports. Payroll. Board meeting minutes. She clicked one folder. Beneficiary payments. Only 12 grants had actually been issued. 12. Out of more than 200 approved applications. Total assistance provided? $18,450. I frowned. That's impossible. She nodded sadly. I know. The fundraiser alone raised almost $150,000. And sponsorships added another $200,000. I stared. How much? Approximately $358,000. I forgot how to breathe. $358,000. Raised because people believed they were helping children. Only 18,000 had actually reached families. Less than 6%. The rest? Rachel clicked another spreadsheet. Administrative expenses. Travel. Entertainment. Consulting. Vehicle purchases. Marketing. Luxury accommodations. Personal reimbursements. Designer clothing. Private club memberships. Even wine purchases labeled as community outreach hospitality. I objected. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. They told me nonprofits are complicated. What happened? They reduced my access. And then, they asked me to backdate documents. I looked up sharply. What kind of documents? Board meeting minutes. So it looked like purchases had already been approved. She nodded. When I refused, she smiled sadly. They fired me. She slid a thick envelope across the table. I've been carrying these for 6 weeks. Inside were photocopies, signed approvals, internal emails, budget drafts. One email stopped me cold. From Vanessa. To Rachel. Subject. Claire. The message read, Claire only understands hospital bills. Don't discuss foundation finances with her. If she asks questions, remind her she's emotional. Mom says she'll eventually give up like always. I read it twice. Not because I doubted it. Because it was so familiar. My entire life. Whenever I challenged anything, I became emotional. Whenever Vanessa manipulated people, she became passionate. Funny how those words always depended on who was speaking. Rachel reached into her bag one last time. There is one more thing. She handed me a small digital recorder. I started recording meetings after they asked me to change records. I stared at it. There are dozens. Have you listened to them? No. Why not? I couldn't. She swallowed. I kept hoping someone else would stop them. I understood. Sometimes the hardest part isn't exposing evil. It's accepting that the people committing it are your own family. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep, I played the first recording. Mostly routine business. Budgets. Events. Sponsors. Then, near the end, my mother's voice filled the room. Calm. Confident. Cold. People donate to stories, not children. Vanessa laughed. Exactly. My mother continued. As long as Sophie stays the face of this organization, donations won't slow down. Someone asked quietly, what happens when she grows older? My mother's answer made my blood run cold. Then we'll find another sick child. Silence. Then everyone laughed. I stopped the recording, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and threw up. Because I finally understood the truth. My daughter had never been their granddaughter. She had been Phase 1. And according to those recordings, they were already searching for Phase 2. The only thing they didn't know was that someone else had already copied every word they had ever said. And in exactly 6 weeks, those recordings would be playing through speakers loud enough for the entire city to hear. For 3 days, I didn't touch the recordings again. Not because I was afraid of what they contained. Because I already knew. The first recording had told me everything I needed to know. To my mother, children were marketing. Families were fundraising opportunities. Pain was advertising. My daughter had simply been the first successful campaign. I could never unhear those words. People donate to stories, not children. On Saturday morning, Sophie found me sitting at the kitchen table with the gray binder open. She climbed carefully into my lap, still protecting her healing chest. Mom? Yeah. Are you working? A little. She looked at the binder. Is that about my heart? I smiled. Kind of. She traced the edge of one page with her finger. Did I do something wrong? The question broke me. Children always assume adults' problems are somehow their fault. I hugged her gently. No, sweetheart. Then why are you sad? I looked into her bright blue eyes. Because some grown-ups forgot how to be kind. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. Maybe they need a timeout. I laughed through tears. Maybe they did. That afternoon, Rachel called. I've listened to the rest of the recordings. And? You need to hear meeting number 14. Why? It's different. I played it that night. The date stamp showed it had been recorded just 10 days after Sophie's surgery. Vanessa sounded excited. We're becoming too dependent on one story. Someone agreed. So what's next? My mother's voice answered calmly. We expand. Another board member asked. How? My mother replied without hesitation. We partner with children's hospitals. Vanessa laughed. We'll have an endless supply of stories. Another voice asked, won't parents expect financial help? My mother answered, they'll receive publicity. Silence. Then she continued, most people want hope more than money. The room chuckled. Rachel's breathing could be heard in the background. No one challenged them. No one objected. No one reminded them they were discussing real children. I stopped the recording halfway through. Not because it became worse. Because I finally understood something. This wasn't just greed. It had become a business model. A scalable one. The following Monday, I met Rachel again. This time she brought someone with her. A tall man in his 40s wearing a navy suit. My name's David Foster. He shook my hand. I'm a forensic accountant. I frowned. For who? Rachel answered. He volunteers with nonprofit oversight organizations. David placed a folder on the table. I've reviewed everything Rachel copied. And? He looked directly at me. If these documents are authentic, they are. Then this isn't per bookkeeping. What is it? He didn't hesitate. It appears to be systematic charitable fraud. The words sounded strangely clinical. Systematic. Charitable. Fraud. 3 words capable of destroying careers. Prison sentences. Entire reputations. David spent nearly an hour explaining the financial records. The pattern was surprisingly simple. Money entered the foundation. A small amount actually reached families. The rest flowed through consulting companies, marketing firms, travel reimbursements, image licensing, management fees. Most of those companies shared one thing in common. They were owned by Vanessa, her husband, or longtime friends. Money wasn't disappearing. It was being redirected. Legally enough to confuse ordinary donors. Illegally enough to attract investigators. There is one problem. David closed the folder. What? Evidence proves financial misconduct. That's good. It proves intent financially. I frowned. What does that mean? It doesn't prove what motivated them. I have recordings. He nodded. Exactly. He looked at Rachel. Those recordings connect the financial records to deliberate deception. For the first time, everything fit together. The paperwork, the emails, the expenses, the recordings, the lies. None of it mattered separately. Together. It became a story. One supported by evidence. So what do? David surprised me. Nothing. I'm sorry. You don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. You don't post on Facebook. I won't. You don't threaten lawsuits. I won't. You stay quiet. Why? Because people committing fraud almost always make one final mistake. He was right. It took only 12 days. Our town announced its annual Community Heroes Awards. Local charities, teachers, volunteers, first responders, business leaders. Every year one nonprofit received the city's highest honor, the Community Legacy Award. The nominees appeared online Friday morning. There were 5. Number 4. The Sophie Morgan Hart Foundation. Vanessa immediately shared the announcement. My mother did too. Then local newspapers, television stations, sponsors. Everyone began celebrating before the winner had even been announced. 3 days later, Vanessa posted another video. This recognition belongs to all of you. She smiled into the camera. We're honored to represent compassion. Compassion. Interesting choice of word. She ended the video with another announcement. If we win. She paused dramatically. We'll host the largest charity gala our city has ever seen. The date appeared on the screen. Exactly 6 weeks away. Expected attendance. Over 700 guests. Television coverage. Business leaders. State officials. Local media. Everyone would be there. Rachel looked at me after watching the video. They're going to celebrate themselves. David smiled slightly. Perfect. I frowned. Perfect. He nodded once. The larger the audience, the fewer excuses remain afterward. The next morning, David introduced me to someone else. A woman named Linda Chavez. She worked for the state's charitable organizations division. She listened quietly while we explained everything. The binder, the emails, the financial records, the recordings, Rachel's testimony. When we finished, she didn't speak for nearly a minute. Finally, she asked one question. Has anyone else seen all of this? No. She nodded. Good. Then she carefully closed the gray binder. I'd like to borrow this. I slid it across the table without hesitation. For months, that binder had felt like the only thing standing between truth and oblivion. Now, someone else was finally carrying it. Linda stood. I think your mother and sister are expecting an award. They are. She smiled very slightly. They're still going to receive one. I looked at her confused. What kind? She picked up the binder. The kind they absolutely deserve. And for the first time since Sophie had gone into surgery, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be coming. Not through revenge. Not through anger. Not through social media. But through something my mother had underestimated her entire life. Evidence. The Community Legacy Awards Gala sold out 3 weeks before the event. More than 700 people filled the ballroom. Business owners, church leaders, doctors, teachers, families who had donated to the foundation. Television cameras lined the back wall. The event was being streamed live across the city's social media pages. Vanessa looked exactly like she had on the night of Sophie's surgery. Perfect hair, a designer gown, and the smile of someone convinced she was about to become the city's newest philanthropist. My mother stood beside her in another expensive dress, greeting guests as if she owned the room. Neither of them noticed me. I wasn't sitting at the front. I wasn't even near the stage. Sophie and I sat quietly in the last row. She wore the same pink dress she'd picked out herself after the doctors finally said she could return to normal activities. The scar on her chest was still visible above the neckline. She wasn't ashamed of it. She called it her bravery zipper. She squeezed my hand. Mom? Yeah. Why are there so many cameras? I smiled softly. Because sometimes the truth deserves an audience. The ceremony began with speeches about generosity and community service. Each nominee was praised. When the announcer reached the 4th finalist, applause erupted. The Sophie Morgan Hart Foundation. A video played across 2 giant screens. There was Sophie, her school picture, hospital photographs, the fundraiser, the gala, my mother's television interviews, Vanessa crying on stage. Every lie carefully packaged into an inspirational story. The audience stood before the video even ended. They believed every second of it. Then the presenter opened the envelope. And this year's Community Legacy Award goes to... A dramatic pause. The Sophie Morgan Hart Foundation. The ballroom exploded with applause. Vanessa hugged my mother. Photographers rushed toward the stage. Both women accepted the Crystal Award with tears in their eyes. Vanessa stepped to the microphone. This honor belongs to every child we've helped. She never finished the sentence. A man in a dark suit quietly walked onto the stage. Then another. Then a woman carrying a leather portfolio. The applause slowly faded. Confused whispers spread through the room. Vanessa frowned. Can I help you? The woman introduced herself calmly. My name is Linda Chavez with the State Charitable Organizations Division. The room became silent. She continued. We're here because an investigation into the foundation has concluded. Vanessa laughed nervously. There must be some misunderstanding. Linda didn't answer. Instead, she handed the presenter a document. He stepped away from the microphone. Within seconds, the giant screens behind the stage changed. The foundation's promotional video disappeared. A spreadsheet appeared instead. Donation total: $358,417. Then another number. Funds delivered directly to children: $18,450. The audience stopped breathing. Linda spoke clearly enough for every camera to record her words. Our investigation found that more than 94% of charitable donations were diverted to unauthorized personal expenses, luxury purchases, and companies controlled by foundation officers. The next slide appeared. Photographs of the Cadillac Escalade, luxury vacations, designer handbags, credit card statements, corporate payments. One by one, every purchase matched to foundation accounts. People began pulling out their phones. Others stared at the stage in disbelief. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God." Vanessa rushed toward the microphone. "This is completely out of context." Before she could continue, Linda nodded toward the sound technician. A recording began playing through the ballroom speakers. My mother's voice echoed across the room. "People donate to stories, not children." Absolute silence. Then Vanessa's laugh. Another recording. "As long as Sophie stays the face of this organization, donations won't slow down." Gasps spread across the ballroom.